Midnight Static Files. The story you are about to hear has its roots hidden in the darkness of reality. It's up to you to believe it or not.
Have you ever wondered if someone has been following you your entire life, not to harm you, but to protect you? Imagine seeing the same silent woman from childhood to adulthood, appearing only when death was moments away. No one else could see her. No one believed she existed. I thought she was nothing more than a terrifying ghost, until I discovered the horrifying truth. She wasn't haunting me. She had been fighting invisible forces to keep me alive for more than 20 years. But who was she, and why had a dead woman chosen me? Tonight, I'm going to tell you a true horror story that completely changed the way I think about life, death, and the unseen world forever. There are stories people hear once and forget forever. They entertain for a few minutes before disappearing into the endless collection of forgotten memories. Then there are stories that refuse to leave. They quietly settle deep inside your mind, returning when you least expect them, making you question whether what you remember was a dream, a nightmare, or something far more terrifying. This is one of those stories. For years, I convinced myself that everything I had witnessed during my childhood was nothing more than an overactive imagination. Children often mistake shadows for people, silence for whispers, and dreams for reality. That simple explanation allowed me to move on with my life. Whenever an old memory surfaced, I buried it beneath logic and common sense, telling myself that none of it had ever been real. But the truth has an unusual way of surviving. It waits patiently in the darkest corners of your memory until the exact moment you're no longer capable of running from it. And when that moment finally arrives, every forgotten image returns with terrifying clarity, forcing you to relive events you spent years trying to erase. It all began on a quiet Friday afternoon after Jumu'ah prayer. The mosque had almost emptied, and the peaceful sound of worshippers exchanging greetings slowly faded into the distance. A cool breeze carried the scent of approaching rain across the courtyard as I sat before an elderly Huzur whose knowledge of spiritual matters was respected by everyone in the area. I hadn't come to him out of curiosity. I came because fear had finally overcome disbelief. For months, my life had been surrounded by incidents that defied every logical explanation I could think of. Every place I stayed eventually became disturbed by strange happenings. Friends who once laughed with me became uncomfortable spending the night in the same room. Neighbors whispered about impossible things they had witnessed but refused to discuss openly. No matter how many times I moved, the darkness somehow seemed to arrive before I did. I desperately needed answers, and people told me that if anyone could explain what was happening, it was the old man sitting quietly before me. He listened without interrupting as I described every incident that had turned my life upside down. I spoke about the mysterious footsteps that echoed across empty rooftops every night even though no one lived above us. I described bathroom doors that somehow locked themselves from the outside, leaving terrified people trapped inside until someone else came to open them. I told him about the strange piles of sand that appeared every morning in different corners of our apartment, even after we had cleaned the entire place the night before. I explained how wet footprints stretched across the hallway although nobody had entered the bathroom for hours. Then I described the moment that had terrified everyone living in the bachelor mess, when a heavy wooden chair had suddenly lifted into the air and crashed across the balcony without anyone touching it. Finally, I told him about the evening we returned home to find our apartment completely destroyed. Furniture had been overturned, plates shattered into pieces, cooking oil splashed across the walls, vegetables scattered across the floor, and even the heavy refrigerator had somehow been pushed several feet from its original place. It looked as though two invisible forces had fought a violent battle inside our home while we were away. Throughout my entire story, the old man remained completely silent. He never interrupted. He never asked unnecessary questions. He simply watched me with calm eyes that somehow made me feel as though he already knew everything I was about to say. When I finally finished speaking, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Nearly a full minute passed before he slowly leaned forward. His expression never changed, but the atmosphere around us suddenly felt much heavier. Then, in a calm voice that sent an unexplained chill through my body, he asked a question that seemed completely unrelated to everything I had just described. Have you ever seen a young woman wearing a yellow sari with a red border? For a brief moment, I almost laughed. Of all the questions I had expected, that was certainly not one of them. I smiled politely and shook my head. No, I answered. I don't think so. The old man continued staring directly into my eyes without blinking. His silence lasted only a few seconds, yet those few seconds felt unbearably long. Then he quietly said, "No, you are mistaken. You have seen her. You simply forced yourself to forget." The smile slowly disappeared from my face. I couldn't explain why those words affected me so deeply, but something inside my chest suddenly tightened. It felt as though someone had quietly unlocked a door inside my mind that had remained sealed for decades. Strange images began flashing through my memory faster than I could understand them. The old man noticed the change in my expression and spoke again. "The girl wearing the yellow sari with the red border has followed you since you were a child. She has never left your side, not even for a single day." The moment those words reached my ears, my heartbeat became louder than every sound around me. My breathing grew heavier. The room suddenly felt colder than before. It was as though time itself had stopped moving. I wanted to deny what he had just said, but no words came out of my mouth. Instead, something far more frightening happened. Every forgotten memory returned at once. I was no longer sitting inside the mosque. I was a little boy again, standing barefoot inside the old police quarters where my father had once been posted. The smell of wet soil filled the air after an afternoon rain. Endless green fields stretched beyond the compound, while the gentle current of the Akamadi River flowed quietly behind our quarters. Beside the building stood an enormous mango tree unlike any I had ever seen before. Its thick branches spread across the sky like giant arms, casting dark shadows over the bushes beneath it. Torn police evidence bags hung from those branches, moving gently whenever the wind blew. During the day they looked strange enough, but after sunset they produced soft rustling sounds that resembled whispers floating through the darkness. The older police officers refused to walk near that tree after evening. Local villagers crossed the road rather than pass beneath it. Mothers called their children back inside whenever they wandered too close. Everyone knew the stories surrounding that tree, although no one dared speak about them in detail. At the time, I was far too young to understand fear. Because of my father's government job, our family moved from one district to another every few years, and in 1998 we arrived at Sarajtikan police station. To me, every new place felt like another adventure waiting to be explored. The warnings of adults only made mysterious places more interesting. The more they told us not to go somewhere, the more determined I became to discover what they were hiding. That ancient mango tree quickly became the center of my curiosity. I spent countless afternoons playing nearby, completely unaware that every step I took toward that tree was quietly leading me toward a meeting that would change the rest of my life forever. Hidden beneath those old branches, someone had already been waiting for me. Back then, my closest friend was a boy named Nur Nabi. His family lived in a small house near the dumping ground beside the police station, and despite the differences in our families, we were inseparable. Every afternoon, once school was over, we disappeared from the sight of our parents and spent hours inventing games that only children could enjoy. We played marbles until our fingers became covered in dust, kicked around an old football whose faded black and white patches had almost disappeared, climbed trees to steal raw mangoes, and built imaginary kingdoms out of mud after the rain. Those endless afternoons remain some of the happiest memories of my childhood because, at that age, the world still felt innocent. We believed nothing truly bad could ever happen to us. Fear belonged to adults, not to children. We laughed at the ghost stories they told, convinced they existed only to stop us from wandering too far from home. One afternoon, while the sun hung low above the fields and the entire compound glowed beneath the warm golden light of late afternoon, Nurnabi suggested we play hide-and-seek. Everyone eagerly agreed. I had lost the previous round, so I was determined not to be found this time. As the others covered their eyes and began counting loudly, I ran farther than I ever had before. Without thinking, I crossed the familiar path leading toward the ancient mango tree. The bushes beneath its branches were so thick that they almost formed a wall of leaves, making them the perfect hiding place. I remembered every warning the adults had given us about that part of the compound, but excitement drowned out caution. Winning the game felt far more important than old village stories. Carefully pushing aside the branches, I squeezed through the bushes until I found a small open space hidden completely from view. No one would ever think to search there. The moment I settled into my hiding place, an uneasy silence surrounded me. Outside the bushes, I could still hear the distant voices of my friends calling each other's names, but inside, everything felt strangely different. The air suddenly became colder, even though only moments earlier the afternoon had been unbearably warm. It wasn't the refreshing coolness of shade beneath a tree. It was a lifeless cold that crept slowly across my skin, making every tiny hair on my arms stand upright. Even the wind seemed to disappear. The leaves stopped moving. The birds that had been singing only seconds earlier became completely silent. It felt as though nature itself had paused, holding its breath for something I could neither see nor understand. At first, I assumed I was simply imagining things. I told myself that I was nervous because I had hidden somewhere forbidden. But then I noticed something that instantly stole every thought from my mind. Just a few feet away, standing perfectly still beneath another branch of the mango tree, was a young woman. She looked no older than 18 or 19 years old. She wore a faded yellow sari bordered with deep red, the fabric hanging gently around her as though untouched by the wind. Her long black hair rested neatly over one shoulder, and her face carried neither happiness nor sadness. It was completely calm, almost peaceful, yet there was something deeply unsettling about the silence surrounding her. She wasn't looking around. She wasn't searching for anyone. From the moment I noticed her, her eyes were already fixed on me. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My heart pounded so hard that I could hear it inside my ears. Every story I had ever heard about ghosts and haunted places suddenly rushed back into my mind. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call for Nurnabi or anyone else nearby. But strangely, none of those things happened. Instead of overwhelming terror, I felt something I have never been able to explain. Her presence was frightening, yet at the same time it felt strangely familiar, almost comforting. There was no hatred in her eyes. No anger. No threat. She simply stood there, watching me with a quiet patience that made it seem as though she had been expecting me to arrive. Then I heard the voices of my friends growing louder as they searched nearby. Panic returned immediately. If they discovered me, I would lose the game. Without even thinking about who, or what was standing before me, I slowly raised my finger to my lips and whispered, "Please, don't tell them where I'm hiding." The words escaped my mouth as naturally as if I had been speaking to an ordinary person. The young woman never answered. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Yet somehow I felt absolutely certain that she had understood every word. A strange calmness settled over me, replacing the fear that had gripped me only moments before. Seconds later, Nurnabi and the others pushed through the nearby bushes, searching everywhere around the tree. They came incredibly close, close enough that I could clearly hear their footsteps and laughter. One of them even looked directly toward the place where I was hiding. Yet none of them seemed able to see me. After searching for several minutes, they eventually gave up and ran off in another direction, convinced I had hidden somewhere else entirely. Only after their voices disappeared into the distance did I slowly step out from behind the bushes. The first thing I did was look toward the place where the mysterious young woman had been standing. She was gone. Completely gone. There were no footsteps leading away from the tree. No movement among the bushes. No sound of someone walking across the dry leaves. It was as though she had vanished into the air itself. I searched the area for several minutes, circling the tree again and again, but there was no sign that anyone had ever been there. When I finally returned to my friends, they laughed because none of them had been able to find me. Nabi demanded to know where I had hidden, but for reasons I couldn't explain, I never mentioned the young woman. Something deep inside me told me to keep that encounter to myself. Even as a child, I somehow understood that nobody would believe what I had seen. So I simply smiled, pointed toward the bushes beneath the mango tree, and told them I had discovered the perfect hiding place. The others immediately refused to go anywhere near it. They called me crazy for hiding beneath the haunted tree, and before long we forgot about the game and returned to playing football as though nothing unusual had happened. But I couldn't forget. That evening, while eating dinner with my parents, my thoughts kept drifting back to the silent girl in the yellow sari. Who was she? Why had she been standing beneath the tree? Why hadn't she spoken? Most importantly, why hadn't she revealed my hiding place? I tried convincing myself that perhaps she was a villager I had never met before. Maybe she had simply been passing through the area. Yet deep inside, I already knew that explanation didn't make sense. No ordinary person could disappear that quickly. No ordinary person could stand so perfectly still without making the slightest movement. And no ordinary person could leave behind absolutely no trace of ever being there. That night, long after everyone in the police quarters had gone to sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face again. Not frightening, not angry, simply watching me in complete silence. I didn't realize it then, but that single afternoon beneath the ancient mango tree had changed my life forever. I believed I had met a mysterious stranger only once. The truth was far more terrifying. That was not the beginning of our story. It was only the first time. I became aware that she had already been watching me. The days that followed should have allowed the memory of that strange encounter to fade away, just as most childhood memories eventually do. But this one refused to disappear. Instead, it became clearer with each passing week. The mysterious young woman beneath the mango tree didn't remain a single unforgettable incident buried in my past. She began appearing again and again, always without warning and always in complete silence. Sometimes I would notice her standing beneath the old mango tree while I played football with Nabi. Other times she stood quietly beyond the open field, her yellow sari moving gently in the breeze while every other object around her remained strangely still. On a few occasions, I caught sight of her outside our kitchen window while my mother prepared dinner. She never called my name. She never smiled. She never raised her hand to get my attention. She simply watched me with the same calm expression that never seemed to change. The strangest part wasn't that she kept appearing. The strangest part was that after a while, I stopped being afraid. Instead of terror, an unfamiliar sense of comfort slowly took its place. Her silent presence somehow made me feel safer, although I couldn't understand why. Every time I saw her, I would immediately call someone else to look. I shouted for my mother more times than I could count. "Ma, look! She's standing there." My mother would rush to the window or step outside, only to find an empty yard. She would gently place her hand on my head, smile, and tell me I had been imagining things again. Once I even grabbed Nabi's arm and pointed toward the mango tree where the girl stood only a few yards away. He stared exactly where I pointed before looking back at me with a confused expression. "There's nobody there," he said. I looked again, and she was still standing in exactly the same place, looking directly at me. That was the first time I realized something that sent a strange chill through my body. I wasn't imagining her. She was really there, but somehow, I was the only person who could see her. As the months passed, I began noticing another strange pattern. She never appeared when I was surrounded by many people. She only came when I was alone or when my thoughts drifted away from everyone around me. If I wandered toward the river by myself, I would suddenly feel as though someone was watching me, and when I turned around, she would be standing several yards away in complete silence. If I stayed behind after a football game while everyone else walked home, I would catch a glimpse of her between the trees. She never moved closer, yet she never seemed far away either. The distance between us remained almost exactly the same every single time, as though an invisible boundary separated our worlds. I often wondered why she never spoke. Was she unable to? Or was there something she wanted to say but simply couldn't? As a child, I didn't understand any of it. I only knew that every time I saw her, an odd feeling settled inside me, a feeling that somehow told me I wasn't alone. One rainy afternoon, the answer to a question I had never asked arrived in the most terrifying way imaginable. It had rained heavily since morning, and by late afternoon the Akamadi River had risen higher than usual. The water moved more quickly, carrying leaves, branches, and floating weeds along its muddy current. Despite the weather, many women from the police quarters gathered near the riverbank to wash clothes and bathe, just as they did every week. My mother went with them, and like every curious child, I followed behind without asking permission. The adults were busy talking among themselves while the children splashed in the shallow water near the edge of the river. At first everything felt perfectly normal. We laughed, chased each other through the water, and threw handfuls of river water at one another without a care in the world. I wandered farther into the river than I should have. The water barely reached my waist, so I wasn't worried. What I couldn't see beneath the muddy surface were the thick underwater weeds stretching silently across the riverbed. One careless step was all it took. My foot became tangled. I tried pulling it free, but the more I struggled, the tighter the weeds wrapped around my legs. Within seconds I lost my balance. The current pushed against me with surprising force, dragging me away from the riverbank. I tried screaming for help, but muddy water rushed into my mouth before I could call out. Panic consumed me. I kicked wildly, clawing at the weeds beneath the surface, but nothing worked. My body sank deeper. The sounds of people shouting above the water became distant and distorted. Sunlight disappeared behind the murky river as everything around me turned dark. For the first time in my young life, I truly believed I was going to die. My chest burned as my lungs begged for air. Every desperate movement only exhausted me further. I could no longer tell which direction led to the surface. The river seemed determined to pull me into its darkness forever. Just as my strength began fading and my eyes slowly closed, I saw something moving through the water. At first I thought it was another cluster of weeds drifting toward me. But then the shape became clearer. Through the muddy current, I recognized the flowing yellow fabric. Her sari moved beneath the water as though untouched by the river itself. She didn't swim. She didn't struggle against the current. She simply appeared beside me with the same calm expression I had seen beneath the mango tree countless times before. She looked directly into my eyes. There was no fear on her face. No panic. No urgency. Only an indescribable sadness mixed with quiet determination. Before I could understand what was happening, she moved past me toward the riverbank. I watched as she reached my mother from beneath the water and wrapped both hands tightly around my mother's ankles. Startled by the sudden force, my mother instinctively pulled upward with all her strength. In the same desperate movement, her hands caught hold of my shirt. Moments later I burst through the surface of the river, coughing violently as air rushed back into my lungs. Several people grabbed my arms and dragged me safely onto the muddy bank while my mother held me tightly against her chest, crying harder than I had ever seen before. As soon as I was able to breathe properly, I looked around frantically. The first thing I searched for wasn't my friends or the villagers. It was her. I pointed toward the river and whispered between heavy breaths, the girl in the yellow sari, she saved me. She pulled you. Everyone stared at me in confusion. My mother gently wiped the mud from my face and assumed I was delirious after nearly drowning. The others exchanged nervous glances before quietly telling her that frightened children often imagine strange things after traumatic experiences. Nobody believed me. Nobody looked toward the river because, according to them, there had never been anyone else in the water. But I knew what I had seen. I wasn't confused. I wasn't dreaming. She had been there. She had saved my life without saying a single word. That evening, after returning home, I sat alone outside the police quarters watching the river disappear beneath the colors of sunset. Questions filled my mind faster than I could answer them. Who was she? Why had she chosen to save me? Why did she appear only to me? Most importantly, why did it feel as though she had been protecting me long before I had ever noticed her? I had no answers. I simply watched the fading light until darkness covered the river once again, unaware that the silent girl in the yellow sari had just become an inseparable part of my destiny. Life has a strange way of convincing us that the past eventually stays where it belongs. As the years passed, my childhood slowly disappeared behind new responsibilities, new friendships, and new dreams. My father received another transfer, forcing our family to leave Sirajdikan police station behind. The old quarters, the Akamati River, the ancient mango tree, and the silent girl in the yellow sari gradually became memories that surfaced only occasionally. School turned into college, college became university, and before I realized it, I had stepped into adulthood. There were examinations to pass, a career to build, and a future to chase. The mysterious events that had once defined my childhood slowly faded beneath the weight of ordinary life. I convinced myself that whatever had happened during those years belonged to another version of me, a frightened little boy with an overactive imagination. Looking back, I realized that I wasn't forgetting the past. I was simply becoming too busy to notice that the past had never truly disappeared. After graduating from university, I accepted my very first job in Dhaka. Like thousands of young people trying to establish themselves, I rented a small room in Dhanmondi with one of my seniors from school, Mansoor Bhai. He was calm, practical, and the kind of person who laughed at ghost stories without giving them a second thought. Living with him made life easier. We shared expenses, cooked together whenever we had time, and spent long evenings talking about work, family, and the future. For the first time in many years, life felt wonderfully ordinary. Nothing unusual happened during the first few weeks. There were no strange noises, no mysterious figures, and no unsettling feelings. I honestly believed that whatever had followed me during childhood had finally been left behind in Sirajdikan. That comforting illusion lasted barely 2 months. One morning, I woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing. Mansoor Bhai was quietly packing his clothes into 2 large travel bags. His movements were hurried, almost desperate, and the expression on his face immediately caught my attention. He looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he folded his shirts. At first, I assumed an emergency had forced him to return home. Still half asleep, I asked casually, "What's going on? Are you going somewhere?" He stopped for a moment before looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was pure fear. "I'm leaving this room today," he said quietly. His answer confused me. Leaving? Why? For several seconds, he remained silent, as though deciding whether he should tell me the truth. Finally, he sat down on the edge of his bed and took a slow, unsteady breath. "I've been trying to convince myself that I'm imagining things," he began. "For almost 2 weeks, I've been waking up in the middle of the night for no reason. Every single time I open my eyes, I feel like someone else is inside this room with us. At first I blamed my own imagination. Then I blamed stress from work. But every night, the feeling became stronger. A cold sensation slowly spread through my body as I listened." Mansour Bai lowered his voice even further. "The first few nights, I only saw a dark shape above your bed. It looked like a shadow hanging over your face while you slept. I told myself it was because of the streetlight outside the window. I tried ignoring it. But the shadow kept appearing night after night. It never moved. It simply remained above you until sunrise." I stared at him without saying a word. He swallowed hard before continuing. "Last night, I decided to walk closer. I wanted to prove to myself that it was only a shadow." His hands began shaking again. "The closer I got, the clearer it became." He paused. "It wasn't a shadow. It had a face." My heart skipped a beat. "It wasn't standing on the floor," he whispered. "It was floating just above your head. Its hair covered part of its face, and its eyes." He stopped speaking, unable to finish the sentence immediately. "I've never seen eyes like that before. They weren't angry. They weren't glowing. They simply stared at me without blinking. The moment I looked directly at it, I couldn't move. It felt like every muscle in my body had frozen. The room around us suddenly felt much colder. I don't know what that thing is," he continued, "but I know one thing. It isn't human." I tried forcing a smile, hoping to calm him down, but even I could hear how weak my own voice sounded. I suggested that perhaps he had experienced sleep paralysis or a vivid dream. Maybe exhaustion had distorted his vision. Maybe the changing light from outside had created an illusion. I offered every logical explanation I could think of. He shook his head before I finished speaking. "No. I was fully awake. I know the difference between a dream and reality." Then he looked directly into my eyes and spoke the sentence that haunted me for years afterward. "It wasn't trying to hurt you. It was protecting you." Those words struck me harder than anything else he had said. Before I could ask another question, he lifted his bags, walked toward the door, and left the apartment without looking back. I never managed to convince him to return. Even years later, whenever we occasionally met, he refused to discuss that night. After Mansour Bai left, I spent several weeks living alone. Every night before sleeping, I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering whether someone really stood above my bed while I slept. I never saw anything. I never heard unusual sounds. Yet I couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling that invisible eyes were quietly watching me from somewhere just beyond my reach. Eventually, the loneliness became unbearable, and I decided to move into another bachelor mess behind Mohammedpur Agricultural Market, believing that a fresh start would finally free me from everything that had happened. At first, the new building seemed perfectly ordinary. It was old, crowded, and constantly noisy. Office workers, university students, and young professionals lived together, filling the hallways with laughter, arguments, and late-night conversations. Compared to living alone, the lively atmosphere felt comforting. I told myself that being surrounded by people would finally silence the fears that had begun creeping back into my life. I couldn't have been more wrong. The strange incidents began so gradually that nobody paid much attention. One evening, someone entered the bathroom only to discover the door locked from the outside when they tried to leave. Everyone assumed another roommate was playing a prank. The next day, exactly the same thing happened to someone else. Then another person claimed that a heavy bucket had somehow appeared against the bathroom door while he was inside, trapping him until someone heard his cries for help. Arguments broke out as everyone accused each other of childish jokes, yet no one ever admitted doing anything. Within days, the atmosphere inside the building changed completely. After midnight, heavy footsteps echoed across the roof almost every night. They didn't sound like ordinary footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and unbelievably heavy, as though someone enormous walked back and forth directly above our rooms. Several tenants climbed onto the roof together, expecting to find intruders. Every single time, the roof was completely empty. None of us realized it then. But something had already been living inside that building long before we arrived. The longer we stayed inside that bachelor mess, the more the strange incidents intensified. What had once been dismissed as harmless pranks slowly transformed into something none of us could explain. Every morning, someone discovered small piles of clean, dry sand in different corners of the apartment. We swept them away before leaving for work, yet by the following morning they would appear again as though someone had carefully placed them there during the night. The bathroom floor was another mystery. No matter how thoroughly we dried it before going to bed, fresh water always covered the tiles the next morning. Long, wet footprints stretched across the hallway, leading from the bathroom toward the kitchen before suddenly disappearing in the middle of the room. We questioned every tenant, checked the plumbing, searched for leaking pipes, and even blamed one another, but nothing explained what we continued to witness. Gradually, the cheerful atmosphere inside the building disappeared. Conversations became quieter. People stopped laughing after sunset. Everyone hurried back to their rooms before midnight, pretending not to notice the strange sounds that echoed through the darkness. One evening, after another sleepless night, one of the senior tenants finally lost his patience. He stormed onto the balcony, furious that everyone kept blaming ghosts for things they couldn't explain. Standing there with a cigarette in one hand, he shouted into the empty darkness, daring whatever was hiding inside the building to show itself. The rest of us watched nervously from inside the room, embarrassed by his anger but too frightened to stop him. A heavy wooden chair stood beside him, the same chair everyone used while drinking tea after work. Suddenly, without anyone touching it, the chair trembled. At first we thought someone had accidentally kicked it, but then it slowly lifted several inches above the floor. Every conversation stopped instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Before our eyes, the chair hung motionless in the air for what felt like an eternity. Then, with unbelievable force, it shot across the balcony and slammed into the concrete floor only inches away from the man who had been shouting. The impact echoed throughout the building like an explosion. He collapsed backward in terror, his face completely drained of color. None of us laughed. None of us tried to explain what had happened. Deep inside, every person standing there understood the same horrifying truth. We were no longer imagining things. Fear consumed the entire apartment after that night. Some tenants began sleeping with the lights on. Others refused to stay alone under any circumstances. A few even recited prayers continuously until sunrise. Yet nothing changed. The footsteps continued. The whispers continued. The piles of sand continued appearing. It felt as though the building itself had become alive, quietly observing every move we made. Then came the incident that finally forced us to seek help. It happened on a Thursday evening after work. Like every other day, we stopped at the tea stall beneath the building before heading upstairs. We bought fish, vegetables, rice, lentils, cooking oil, and everything we needed for dinner. The youngest member of our mess volunteered to carry the groceries upstairs and prepare the ingredients while the rest of us stayed behind to finish our tea. We joked with him as he disappeared into the building, completely unaware that within minutes our lives would change forever. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The moment I answered, I heard nothing but heavy breathing. Finally, a trembling voice whispered, "Please, come upstairs, now." I had never heard fear like that before. Without asking another question, all of us ran toward the apartment as fast as we could. The young man stood frozen outside the front door, unable to speak. His face had turned completely white, and his hands shook uncontrollably. He simply pointed toward the room. When we stepped inside, every one of us stopped in disbelief. The apartment looked as though a violent explosion had ripped through it. Rice and lentils covered the floor. Fish had been thrown against the walls. Vegetables were scattered in every direction. Cooking oil dripped from the ceiling and spread across the tiles. Every plate had shattered into tiny fragments. Tables and chairs had been overturned. Even the heavy refrigerator had somehow been pushed several feet across the room, something that would have required the strength of several grown men. Yet the apartment had been locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. No missing valuables. Nothing had been stolen. It didn't resemble a robbery. It resembled the aftermath of an invisible war. The following afternoon, after Friday prayer, we visited the elderly Huzur whose wisdom was known throughout the area. He listened carefully while we described every incident from the very beginning. Unlike everyone else, he showed no surprise. When we finished speaking, he closed his eyes for several long moments before quietly saying, "The family living in that building is not human." His words sent an immediate chill through the room. He explained that long before the building had been constructed, a woman and her small child had died on that land. Their souls had never found peace. The child still behaved exactly as he had in life, playing with sand throughout the house, leaving little piles behind wherever he went. The mother wandered endlessly through the building, her clothes forever soaked with water, leaving wet footprints wherever she walked. They weren't trying to frighten anyone. They simply continued living the only existence they knew. For a brief moment, I smiled in disbelief. Everything sounded impossible. The old man slowly turned toward me, and the kindness in his face disappeared. Looking directly into my eyes, he asked, "Do you remember the girl in the yellow sari?" My entire body froze. Before I could answer, he continued speaking. "The one with the red border. The one who has followed you since childhood. The one only you can see." My heartbeat became painfully loud. Every forgotten memory returned with terrifying clarity. The mango tree. The bushes. The river. The day I nearly drowned. Her silent face. Her watchful eyes. My voice barely escaped my lips as I whispered, "Who was she?" The old man took a slow breath before answering. "She was never human." He explained that decades earlier, a young woman had died near the ancient mango tree before her life had reached its natural end. Her unfulfilled hopes bound her spirit to that place, leaving her unable to cross into the next world. On the afternoon I hid beneath the tree and trusted her with my childish secret, something extraordinary had happened. Without realizing it, I had acknowledged her existence with complete innocence. In the unseen world, that innocent act created a bond powerful enough to connect our lives forever. From that day onward, she chose to remain beside me. She wasn't haunting me. She had accepted the role of my silent guardian. Suddenly, every unexplained event throughout my life made perfect sense. She was the unseen presence that had saved me from drowning in the Akamadi River. She was the figure Mansour Bai had seen standing above my bed while I slept. She had followed me through every city, every rented room, and every stage of my life without ever asking for recognition. Even the destruction inside the bachelor mess was finally explained. The Huzur revealed that what we had witnessed wasn't random paranormal activity. It was a violent confrontation between the restless spirits living inside that building and the silent woman who refused to let them come near me. The shattered furniture, the broken dishes, the overturned refrigerator, and the chaos covering the apartment were the physical traces of a battle that human eyes were never meant to witness. While we had been drinking tea downstairs, an invisible war had been fought only a few feet above our heads. Overwhelmed by guilt, I lowered my head. For years, I had feared the very presence that had protected me since childhood. I had mistaken devotion for danger and loyalty for a curse. The old man handed me a glass of water over which he had quietly recited verses from the Quran before speaking one final time. "Pray for her," he said softly. "She is not evil. She is not your enemy. She is only a lonely soul who became attached to an innocent child. But no soul should remain trapped between two worlds forever. If you truly appreciate what she has done for you, ask Allah to grant her peace and release her from this world." Many years have passed since that unforgettable day. Today, I live thousands of miles away from the old police quarters of Sirajdikan. Life has taken me to Kings Park in Perth, Australia, a place filled with beautiful trees, peaceful walking trails, and quiet evenings that feel completely different from the lonely fields of my childhood. Yet every now and then, especially on cold evenings when the wind suddenly becomes still, I feel an indescribable sensation that I have never been able to explain. It lasts only a few seconds, but during those moments I can't help turning around, convinced that someone is standing silently behind me. I never see anyone. Perhaps there is nothing there at all. Or perhaps, somewhere beyond the limits of human sight, a silent soul wearing a faded yellow sari with a red border still watches over the little boy who once trusted her with a simple childhood secret beneath an ancient mango tree. Since that day, I have often wondered whether every unexplained presence in our lives is truly something we should fear. We are taught that every spirit is dangerous, every shadow is evil, and every ghost seeks revenge. But what if that isn't always true? What if, hidden among the countless stories of darkness, there are also forgotten souls whose only purpose is to protect? Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't whether ghosts exist. Perhaps the greatest mystery is whether we have been misunderstanding them all along. And perhaps, somewhere in the silence surrounding us, someone we cannot see has been protecting us for far longer than we could ever imagine.